Okay, so we are back with our next session, which is called Lessons from the Frontline. And in the last few years, we've all seen the pushback, but here's the flip side. There are leaders who are not just surviving, they are building movements, creating brands, and setting global standards. If you can bring the talking down to a minimum, please. Shh. Thank you very much. Going to name a few people that are going to be on our panel right now. Jermaine Craig built Kwanda, a modern-day village that is pooling resources to black communities across the world. Dr. Carlton Brown turned vision into reality with Marshall and Brown, bringing heritage and black ownership into the premium food and drink industry. Michelle De Leon made history by founding World Afro Day, a global celebration of Afro hair, identity, and culture that's impacting schools and communities worldwide. And keeping it all together and going to moderate this session, a good friend of mine, Funmi Olutoye, an award-winning journalist, producer, and director who knows exactly how to draw the real lessons out of conversations just like this. And she likes also calling me in the morning and asking me to come on television. Good friends of mine, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome your panel onto the stage. Make some noise for them.
Calling Kojo in the morning sounds really sinister, but it's not. So, in fact, I can even explain that. So, yes, my name is Funmi. I'm a producer at Good Morning Britain. That's the reason why I call him sometimes to come on our breakfast show to talk about various things. I'm a producer, director, and multimedia journalist, which basically means that we're the ones who basically anything you see on TV, any pictures that you see, any guests that you see, any writing that you see is usually myself or one of the other people that are just like me that do that. My background is actually local news before I went into national news, and I've been at Good Morning Britain for about 4 years now, but I've also worked on other shows like This Morning and Lorraine. I've worked at ITV News as well. So this panel is amazing, as you can see here, and we're going to be talking about this really important subject, which is about how to thrive in the midst of backlash. So I wrote down here that this is a panel that's all about resistance, setback, backlash, maybe even sabotage. But how do we thrive as black leaders in the midst of all of that? Turning pushbacks into opportunities for growth and leadership, which I think is really, really important. So let me just start let's start with you, Michelle. You've had an amazing week this week. Founder of World Afro Day, which was on Monday, which actually led to a world record. Can we give her a round of applause, please? She'll explain that in a second. So do you want to just start by telling us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Yes, so I'm the founder of World Afro Day, and it really is about turning struggle into celebration and through our hair and our identity. And yeah, there's been some changes going on this year in the world, and I think because I started World Afro Day 9 years ago, and it was brand new and people didn't understand, I really much have a resilience mindset that it doesn't matter what's going on outside, I know the path that I'm on and where I'm going. So that doesn't change. Even when the environment gets difficult or changes, I started off with an uphill battle in the beginning. So for me, I stay focused, and you do get no's, but I think you get no's at any point in any year, in any season, you're going to get no's. But I think when you really understand why you're doing what you're doing, nothing that happens on the outside changes your perspective, really. I feel that my perspective hasn't changed this year. If anything, it makes you feel that, I think the thing that made me change this year, I started to look more within the community to look at, right, what can we do together? Because, yeah, it's hostile out there. So how do we work with each other and with others? I think that was my mindset this year.
Amazing, thank you. And Dr. Carlton Brown, tell us more about who you are and what you do.
Hi. Good afternoon. It is a wagwan to the Jamaicans. My name is Dr. Carlton Brown. I am the founder of Marshall & Brown, which is a premium Caribbean food business, but I'm also the host and founder of the UK Black Business Entrepreneur Conference. I'm a part-time academic, but I'm also an entrepreneur and author. My focus has always been about how do we elevate and champion black entrepreneurship in the UK, because I think how we set ourselves up economically is really important, because it alleviates lots of different things, from education to poverty. So entrepreneurship is key. We've been hosting the UK Black Business Entrepreneur Conference for the last 5 years. We write about that, we speak about that in terms of the challenges that exist, whether it's access to finance or opportunities in the market, in the supply chain. And I'm also just publishing my book next year, so please, Amazon, please. It's called The Race Paradox, Why Organizations Fail on Race. So that's me. Thank you.
And Jermaine, tell us about who you are and what you do.
Hi everyone, my name is Jermaine Craig. I am the founder of Kwanda. I'm really an internet kid and hustler, that's how I term myself. I don't know if anyone knows Habbo Hotel, that's kind of where I started my career. It was an online chat room that was virtual. And that's when I made my first $100, and ever since then I was addicted to making money on the internet and communities on the internet. And I've always had this sense that everything we need is readily available, it's just disorganized. So when I look at myself as a black person and I think, they just kicked us out of this club, can we buy that? We actually can. It's not a matter of lack of capital or lack of skills or knowledge. It's, can you line up the right 10, 20 people to make that happen? And so as I look into the world and I think of all the problems we have, whether that's in the philanthropy space, whether that's in entrepreneurship, I'm always thinking, how do we line up the right 100 people in a given order to solve this issue? So I'm generally focused on building platforms that allow us to do that. And the real idea there is that all the resources are in place, it's just a matter of organizing it. And so that's what I'm hopefully spending the rest of my life doing.
Amazing, thank you. So this panel is half titled Lessons from the Front Line. So we're all, I guess, titled as people who are at the front line, at the cutting edge of our industries. We're the ones who are really at the front making change. We're change makers, essentially. When you are on the front line, it does mean that you come up against a lot of resistance from the opposite direction. I want to know from each of you, how do you, first of all, recognize when there is resistance? Because sometimes it's not always obvious. Sometimes it can be a bit covert. How do you recognize resistance, and what strategies have you put in place to kind of go against that? Shall I start with you, Michelle? You're next to me, that's why.
How do I overcome resistance? I don't know. How do I overcome resistance? I think sometimes you have to pivot, don't you? Because sometimes you're like, for example, I'm not going to expose them, but I don't mean to expose them in a bad way, but I approached certain organisations to be involved with World Afro Day this year, and I literally approached nearly all the organisations, and there was not even a reply. There wasn't even an email reply, and sometimes you're baffling. It didn't make sense that these organisations, I didn't get one email back from any of them. And sometimes you have to think, okay, maybe I'm going for the wrong target. Maybe it was me. I thought it made sense to go for those organisations, but actually, whatever I was offering, it didn't appeal to them. There was no connection from them. And then you go to another organisation and the door's wide open. So sometimes you've focused on something and you really want it, and you've gone for that organisation, or you've gone for those set of organisations, like a sector, and there's a reason maybe why that door is not open to you, but there's such a wide spectrum of organisations you can work with. And when you get that yes, you realise, well, actually, maybe that wasn't the right channel, that wasn't the right path. So I think part of it is actually pivoting. That connection or what you wanted there may not be the right thing at the right time. Maybe if I approach them in years' time, the door will be wide open. But I was baffled for a while. It made total sense, but it didn't, because they didn't. Whatever I was offering, they didn't connect with it. But I went to a different organisation, offered something different, and it just flowed. So I think sometimes it might not even be personal. It could be all sorts of reasons why I didn't get an email back from any of those organisations. But I think you can just don't be disheartened and try something else.
Just to follow on from that, I can definitely relate to that in the sense of my own personal career. In the media, it's very a world full of no's, basically, before you get your final yes. And I think it's the same for many people who are in the creative or music industries. But Jermaine, I just wanted to come to you because when I was on your website, I saw that you talked a little bit about the resistance you got from people who are reluctant to give in the first place. So obviously, from Michelle and I's perspective, that we're talking about external resistance, but you're dealing with the resistance that's inside our community. How did you deal with that?
Yeah, so it wasn't something I was fully expecting, but has been the core challenge. And I'm very interested in human psychology, especially black psychology. I think there isn't a lot of information around what we're dealing with on a psychological level. And so the work I do at Kwanda has actually been a good exercise in engaging that. And yeah, my resistance hasn't come from, whether it's external organizations. We kind of built Kwanda on the premise of what happens if people don't actually want you to win. Can you create something that's still anti-fragile against that? And so, yeah, the thing we've largely been engaging with is the resistance within the community. And I think it's just a few things. One is, I'm a black man running what looks like we'll compete with an Oxfam or whatever this is. And there's just no precedent for that. So people look at me and they're like, it's got to be something else. And then when you think that, you think of all the different examples of a black man or a black woman running an organization like this. And then you look into the past and see scams, you see mismanagement, etc. So I think there's like that hill of what we have as historical precedents, and that's like inevitably attached to you, and you have to fight against that. And I think that can catch you by surprise, especially when you're doing something that's for the community. But that's part of the creative challenge. When you're trying to build something that pushes out of what's typical or normal for ourselves.
And Dr. Carlton, you are a man about strategy. You want to improve businesses, you want to make them grow, you want them to be profitable. So I'm guessing you have resistance from all sides, external as well as internal. How did you acknowledge when the resistance came and how did you deal with them?
I think I want to tackle two questions. The first one, how do you recognize the challenges and where do they exist? Well, I like data because I think data is important because I think data underpins the narrative. And I think Edward Deming said it best. He said, without data, you're just another person with an opinion. So if we look at some of the data, we think about access to finance in terms of black entrepreneurs. You're less likely to get funding and finance. If you're a black female, in terms of venture capitalists, you're 0.02.4%. It's a minuscule. It's less than 1% getting access to VC funding since 2009 to 2019, less likely to get funding. So the data's clear. So if we think about corporate organizations, there's still not one black CEO in the UK today, still. So there's lots of organizations who are trying to suggest that they wish to do better around diversity. And I call this the unconscious illusion of inclusion. The senior leadership teams are still very homogenized, whether that's gender or by race. So the evidence is clear, the data tells us that. But the data also tells us very clearly, McKinsey 2023 talks about this, that if you have gender, McKinsey measured the top 1,000 organizations that they do business with. And if they had females in the part of their senior leadership team, they were 26% more likely to perform better than the bottom 25% of those organizations. But where they had race as part of that, they were 36% likely to do better. So having black and ethnic minorities as part of their senior leadership teams actually is good for their bottom line. It's good for business. So that's that recognition, but it's what organizations do with it. But the part to your second question, what do you do? I think you push on, because you're 8 to 12% as black and African people from the diaspora to be more innovative and creative than any other demographic. What does that mean? You're going to bring something new. You're going to bring innovation to the market. What do companies want? They want things new. They want innovation. They want to have a competitive advantage. So you bring that skill set. So if you're not finding it there, if you can't change them, you change them. and focus on what you want to do. And as I think was it Tom Peters who talked to, no, it wasn't Tom Peters. Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective Leaders says, start with the end in mind. Point number 2, start with the end in mind. Focus on what you want to achieve. And if you're not getting it where you're thinking you can get it, find it somewhere else, because you've got the talent and abilities and expertise, it's there. But just believe in that. And if someone's shutting the door, if you keep knocking at it and someone's not going to open it, find a door that's going to open for you. That would be my goal.
Okay, thank you. And talking about pushing on, we live in very interesting times at the moment politically, not just here in the UK, also in the US, across the world really. We're seeing a kind of turn in tide when it comes to DEI initiatives after the kind of wave we saw after what happened with George Floyd. One of the questions I have is basically, now we're kind of seeing some companies kind of change their mind about DEI, about diversity, etc. What do we do when we kind of see perchance that there's a kind of stall in progression, so to speak, or stall in trying to be more inclusive? Because I know from my experience, I'm quite lucky that I work in a company where diversity is constantly being talked about. It's constantly something that they're trying to improve on. There are different networks. Our chief of people is a black woman herself. It's a conversation that happens in the company quite a bit. But I know that in other companies, it might not necessarily be the same. So, in your own experiences, how do we kind of push forward and push past when we see a little bit of stagnation in that progression? I'll start with you, Dr. Carlton.
The question I have is, if you think about all of us in this room, we think about the organisations that we all work for, have worked with, in the last few years, has the dial shifted? Has it really shifted? Celebrating Black History Month is great, Pride is great, Women's International Day is great, World Afro Day is great, but beyond that, the acid test is to see the real change. And has it really changed? After George Floyd, post-George Floyd, there was £200 billion commitment globally from large corporates to supporting diversity and equity and inclusion. But we hear earlier this year the retrenchment because of the geopolitical world that we live in. There was 350,000 black females were made unemployed in America because of DE&I. So the language might have changed in terms of what people are saying, what they want to happen, but sadly, we're still in the same, entrenchment and cycle of, even if you call it DE&I, ESG, corporate social responsibility, the language might have changed, but then sadly the outcomes haven't. But I think we still need to continue to push the agenda that we are talented, we're educated. The fastest growing community at universities in the UK today is people from the African Caribbean diaspora. We are going to university in droves. So I think we keep pushing on and finding those routes to navigate the path of the challenges. But they do exist, they're real. But we shouldn't be delusional in ourselves that we think everything's okay and we have that myopic view of the world, because it's not. It's not easy. So I think we need to push on, we need to be really focused and intentional and call people out for what it is in the right way, That's my call on it.
Jermaine or Michelle, do you have anything to add? If not, I can move on.
Yeah, I'll add a piece. I definitely agree with everything you just said. And one other thing I think is important to do is be tracking two different lanes, which is that, there's one world where we push within the system and make progress there. And then there's another world where you say, actually, if it could be anything, what would it look like? And a lot of the times it's very different to the game we're currently playing. And so we need to be pushing both of those tracks forward. And again, like I said earlier, I think when you look into ourselves as a community, you think about the skill sets we have, the culture we've been brought up in, the resistance we faced, and therefore the tools we've developed, they don't necessarily fit within these structures. And so you need to be building as well as changing at the same time. And I think when you do one or the other, you leave yourself at risk of whether that's burnout, whether that's disenchantment and all of these things. So yeah, I think try and be building two things at the same time. The life you're forced to live and fight against, and the life you actually want to live.
I think that's a really good lead into my next question, which is about having to dilute your identity in order to fit as a leader. There was something an earlier panelist said, Fidel Fatudu. He said it's important to kind of be yourself. And I know if you work in a conglomerate or work in a kind of corporate company, we all know that kind of, face that you have to put in that space, and then there's another face when you're at home with your family, especially as a black person. However, as leaders, how important is it to kind of be that authentic person all the time in order to kind of stay true to your brand and your values and your business or your career that you're building? Michelle?
I think we do have to start setting our own standards and not comply and conform to the standards that are imposed on us. Because if we continue to do that, nothing changes. So I was having a conversation with a young lawyer who was about to start her first position, and we had that conversation about whether she should change her hair to fit in or keep her hair as it is now, and then when she gets a bit higher in the company, then change her hair, then get accepted. And I said to her, well, I'm speaking to female lawyers who are 20 years ahead of you, and they've done what you've done. So if you come along 20 years afterwards and still have to feel that you have to do that, then there's no progress been made. So ultimately, we are good enough as we are. So we have to say we set the bar for ourselves, and maybe that company won't pick you, but another company will, and you're more likely to thrive in that environment where they accept your authenticity, they accept you in your original state, because they already recognize that you have value. You're adding value to the company. So we've got to start setting our own standards, setting our own bar, and then the world's our oyster. Because if you think about culturally how we achieve and innovate in sport and music, and every single sport and music we went into, we've innovated in those areas by being ourselves and adding to those things. And it's only in the corporate where we feel, no, let's conform, let's go in the box. And to be honest, we haven't thrived by doing that. We're still treated the worst in those environments. So it's far better to be original and add something to those environments and be recognised because you're actually adding, as opposed to trying to appease and fit in.
Jermaine, I know that authenticity is very important to your brand, because I saw that, you have a quite strict criteria as to the kind of projects that you choose, the ones that you choose to crowd fund for, and also, people can make suggestions as to projects that they see in West Africa or in other parts of Africa, but actually, ultimately, it's you and your team that make that decision, and you work very specifically with local partners in order to make that decision. How did you make sure that you kind of kept that criteria and were authentic to, the decisions that you made, that you knew was important in order to grow not just the brand, but also to help those in Africa?
Yeah, I think the key thing is, one, we're accountable to our community. So it's really what people like you all in the room say needs to be funded or needs to be represented that's represented. And more times that's something that's coming from the experience you've had. So it's quite easy to stay authentic when your boss is black people. And then, for me personally, and I don't want anyone to say they followed my advice and they lost their job. So this is just my experience. But, and this is something I learned from marketing, but I've learned that when you're struggling to make progress, it's because you're in the middle of being better at the common framework or being completely different. And being completely different is really hard to do because it's not encouraged especially in the UK. And a lot of the times what you actually have to do is don't be better, be very different. And you'll notice, like you mentioned in sports and music, those are the people that get rewarded. It's the people that have thought, okay, I can't be the best at this specific framework because it doesn't come natural to me. I'm losing in the middle, so I'm just going to go and do my own thing completely. And that's how I feel when I read legal contracts and it says hereby and thereby. I don't know, I can't do this. So we're just going to make our own contract, and that's my framework for thinking.
That makes a lot of sense, because there was another panelist earlier that said about how they kind of lead with being contrarian, and actually it's being contrarian is what has made them, the better worker, the better person to kind of lead their career. So that makes a lot of sense. Dr. Carlton, you obviously work within the growth sector of a business. Being authentic must be surely a key part of that. Someone staying true to their values, true to what they want for the business. Tell me about authenticity in the work that you do.
I spent 20 years in the corporate world. And what often they look for is conformity, right? They want you to be compliant and do your job. And for us, we have this, what we call a cognitive dissonance. We have a tension in our brain. We say, what do I do? Because as Du Bois says, we have this double consciousness. We have to be one way here at home. We can have a laugh and a joke, and we can talk in this particular way, in this particular vernacular. And on the other side, we have to be compliant in the workplace, and we have to conform. And it's very difficult because, we don't want to stand out. We want to seem that we want to assimilate. We want to do good. We have to pay our bills. We want to do all those right things and say the right things. So it's very difficult to be your authentic self. What does your authentic self look like? It's a headache. It genuinely is. We go to work every day and have this conflict of who we are in that workplace. Are we our true selves? Do you operate the same way, Jermaine, as at home with your friends as you do with your clients? Michelle, I would contest that we don't, and it's very difficult. But that is the one thing that we have going for us. You're 8 to 12% more likely to be more innovative and creative. Be who you are, because I feel if you're whether you're highly educated, whether you got that drive, that you're creative, you'll offer them something new, something that they don't currently have, and that lies within you, your creativity and that innovation. So I think be yourself as best as you can, and I find that's probably a bit of a cop-out, but it is a balancing act. And I get, because you said, well, I can't go and I can't talk about, even if you want to bring some little jollof rice and a bit of jerk chicken into the office, people, what's he got going on over there then? All of that's going on, and so you're kind of wary of those signals, those symbols, those things that are taking place around you. So you have to try and navigate it. But I try and be as authentic as I can, where we can, but recognizing that we live in a world that looks at us differently sometimes. And we have to navigate all of those things. But as best as I can, I try and be true to myself.
Okay, fantastic. I'll ask you one more question before we take some questions from the audience. What are the most powerful strategies that you've had to kind of implement when you have faced a kind of tough challenge, a tough situation, more specifically a backlash in your businesses or in your careers? Jermaine, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so what I do and what I train my team to do is focus on what we call our flywheel. That is the set of things we have to do to have a guaranteed almost outcome. So if we do this, then this happens, and this can't help but happen. And so we wake up every morning and we have a team meeting and we just look at that thing and say, it doesn't matter what's going on outside. We believe, and we thought hard about this at the onset, that if we do this thing, then this thing's going to happen and this thing's going to happen. And we just do that every day as much as we can. And it's really like a battle with yourself psychologically, and respecting the decision you made a long time ago, in good sense, that here are the set of things that need to happen in order for you to be a success.
Dr. Carlton?
I think networks. Building, I think I heard it on an earlier panel about your network. I call it social capital, and building your social capital, which gives you access to people, resources, and opportunities that you wouldn't get ordinarily unless you had that network. And I know there's an old adage that says your network is your net worth. And I think it's so important that you build your capacity and go into different rooms, not the same rooms that you always go into. Go into different rooms and network and develop that, because I think what that gives you is a bit of resilience and accessibility to other opportunities. So your network is really key.
I would say go big, because I think sometimes you don't go as big. You almost limit yourself to what you could achieve. So, for example, working with the Guinness World Records, they are the biggest organisation of their type. They are the best. And when I was reaching out to people to be a part of World Afro Day, I nearly didn't reach out to Lashana Lynch, because...
Tell us what that world record is, by the way.
Oh, yeah. So we created a world record where it's the most users to take a cultural awareness lesson in 24 hours. And it was a real opportunity to educate people about our hair, our history, our struggle, what's great about our hair, but also what needs to change. So we launched that in Parliament with a business leaders breakfast. So in a way, I almost didn't ask Lashana Lynch, but she's, if you don't know who she is, she's the first Black 007. She was the black female who took over James Bond's title, but gave it back to him. And she's done loads of great things. And I really like her because she is a dark-skinned black woman with natural hair, and she's become an A-list celebrity. As authenticity, you don't get as more authentic than the way she presents herself. And I think it means that any black girl can look at her and say, oh gosh, I don't have to change. There's someone who's in a Hollywood star who looks just like me. So I almost didn't ask her because she doesn't have a high social media presence. So she doesn't do a lot of front-facing publicity. So I would have stopped myself from asking her without even asking her, because you might just say, oh no, she doesn't do that kind of thing. But I did ask her and she did say yes. So I would just say, whatever you're doing, go for, I know it sounds that cliche of go for the stars and then you end up with it, but really do, because actually you don't know where you could reach if you actually just go for it. Just really go for it, because they might say yes, and that's the bottom line. Someone might say yes.
Amazing. Do we have any questions from the audience?
Yes, we do. Thank you. So the first question is, do you feel there has been progress in corporate environments in terms of not seeing natural/Afro hair as unprofessional?
So I feel there has been progress. I think it's been slow progress in the corporate environment, but also because we haven't had the framework maybe to deal with corporate. In a way, with corporate, you need to have the entity, you need to have the training, you need to have a constant presence. So I've only just started to look at corporate. So with corporate, you need to have that credibility. And we do have credibility, but we're not on their radar. So with corporate, it's really important that you have a consistent visibility in those spaces. So it's a whole new area for me to go into. But I think it's an area, if we start to work together as a community, then I think they will shift. Because the trouble is we haven't led them. They have been leading and we've just been receiving. But as a community, we have to lead. We have to say, this is the standard and this is what we expect of you, actually. So when we get to that position where we're going to be leading them, I think they will ultimately change, because it's going to be in their interest to change, because they'll look out of step anyway. And the fact that we actually have to change laws mostly because of business. You know, businesses are the ones that are denying us jobs. Businesses are the ones that are denying us promotions. So the law is so important concerning businesses, but we have to lead. So ultimately, we haven't been leading historically. We haven't led business, and we do have to lead. So I think when we start to get into that position where we're leading, then I think they will change.
I'd also like to answer that question as well, because I think in the media, we've certainly seen a change, I would say. For example, you know, many years ago, it would be women that would wear wigs or wear attachments, etc., etc. Whereas now you have people on ITV as well as on Channel 4 wearing dreads, wearing, their hair out as Afro, wearing their natural. So I definitely think that there has been a shift in the last few years, albeit slow, as you said, and there isn't, quite a framework per se. And yes, you still do get the odd, comment and stuff, but I definitely think there is a kind of change in attitude in the way that people are expecting black people to look now. People, I think, are a little bit more accepting. I've definitely had comments in my time working in corporate spaces. There's a time when I worked in the political space, 20s and someone asked me the most maddest thing about my afro, and I was just like, what? And it was quite shocking, but that was such a long time ago, and to see people on Channel 4 News and sometimes people on ITV News with dreadlocks on reading the news, I mean, you just would not have seen that 20 years ago. So definitely I think there is a kind of slow change, but yeah, it's happening. Any more questions?
Thank you. Next question from the audience is, culture is an unwritten rule, which we can feel and not see through emotion. Do you unplug from your own bias to see the world from different lenses and realities?
So could you just repeat that last sentence again?
Yeah,
Sorry.
sure. Culture is an unwritten rule, which we can feel and not see through emotion. Do you unplug from your own bias to see the world from different lenses and realities?
Interesting. Yeah. In the work environment.
Yeah, in the work environment. Whilst you guys might be searching for your own inclusion, are there any times when you unplug from your own bias?
The answer is no. In a nutshell. You sit around a boardroom, the table like where you're sitting at now. So, Kojo, he might have confirmation bias. Oh, a black person's coming in to play football for Arsenal. He's going to be lazy. Because confirmation bias just supports the notion that you're seeing, but you have a perception of a particular group of people for whatever particular lens. You might have an affinity bias. You like people who look like you. You have an unconscious bias. So your biases are plugged in to who you are. Consciously or unconsciously, you're there. So I think it's very difficult for you to separate who you are. So the football hooligan on a Saturday afternoon who's drinking 10 pints of lager, and is marching on a Saturday afternoon, walks into the workplace on Monday, he's now got to comply with DE&I initiatives and corporate social responsibility, and he's recruiting you. Does he unplug from what he felt on a Saturday afternoon in the workplace on Monday? The answer is I don't think so. So the challenge is real. I think it's very difficult for individuals to unplug themselves from how they see themselves, who they are. On an organizational front, I think Peter Drucker said it best. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. What does he mean by that? Your culture is embedded to who you are as an organization. So it's very difficult to change because it's so glacial. It's been there for 10 years, decades, and it's the way you operate. It's like your operating system as an organization. So it's difficult. So culture, I think it's very difficult in answer to that particular question to unplug yourself, whether as an individual or as an organization.
And also, you know what, I can even give an example right here, right now, 10 minutes ago. So, well, not 10 minutes, yesterday. So when I was researching each of the panelists, for me, I just assumed Jermaine was a Caribbean. Jermaine Craig is Caribbean. When I looked him up, I realized he was Nigerian. I'm like, hey, you're my Nigerian brother. Like, I couldn't believe it. So already there's a bias with him, there's a bias that I had of you, thinking that you were Caribbean. Not to say that even means anything, but I just assumed you were Caribbean. So I think it's also about catching yourself, because, sometimes I can be kind of sympathetic to people who are not in our community, who do have these kind of unconscious biases and are just not aware. I have definitely come across some politicians in my life who just, they're not mean and they're not spiteful, they just don't know. And I think sometimes it's about, yes, the education, but it's also about, once you have that education, catching yourself when you do it. So actually, when I spoke to Jermaine today, I was like, I didn't even know you were Nigerian. Like, oh my God, that kind of thing. And then, I'm telling you this now, but in my mind, I was like, why are you even making a big deal of it? So what? It was Caribbean, it's Nigerian, like, so what? That kind of thing. So it's about, being aware of it, and it's also about making sure that doesn't inform the decisions that you make as a leader when it comes to jobs or promotions, etc., etc. Yeah.
I think I do have to spend time looking at the lens through mainstream, because I want them to connect with what I'm doing and I want them to be part of change. So I do have to think about it from a school teacher's perspective. What do they need to learn? I'm thinking about nursery teachers. How do I connect with them? I'm thinking about businesses. How do I let them understand? I've got to get into their headset as well, because nobody understands our hair, how important and how significant it's been historically for us on so many different levels. So I do have to, so for example, for the Guinness World Record, I had to create a lesson that would reach my boss, that would reach the mum on the street with her kid, that would meet my family. So yeah, I think that I have had to look at things from different people's perspective in order to shift the dial on a more global scale. Because the way I think World Afro Day, I'm always thinking globally and making the biggest change in the quickest way, which means I do have to think about other people's perspectives. How do I reach them? So I do have to look at it from other perspectives.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think sometimes it's useful to say, look, I'm like everyone else I meet, and therefore the way I think, feel, behave is similar to how other people think, feel, behave. So when we think about other races, for example, the way I am towards another black person, it's plausible and perfectly normal that a white person is to a white person the same way. And so it just gives you more of a realistic understanding of how the world works, and allows you to give yourself grace and other people grace and be dealing in reality, as opposed to the idea of how you want other people to think but aren't willing to make the change yourself.
Amazing. Thank you to all the panelists today. You've been amazing, really insightful. Can we give them a round of applause? Thank you.